Hi, this is Maria Williams. I'm so glad you're joining me today. In this video, I will show you how to make an updated version of the Never Ending card using some new dies from Concord and Ninth called the Endless Birthday Infinity dies. These dies make this kind of card together a breeze, but there are some things to be mindful of, so I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. Here is a look at a traditional never-ending card. I made it for my husband about 8 years ago. And then here is the circular new version with the Concord and Ninth dies. The main die that you're going to use is that semicircular one, and it cuts that semicircle and also scores it where you need to fold. And this Birthday Stacks stamp set to me is just perfect for these cards. And I'm using the banners and the presents for the top and the bottom of the front. You can also use the dies and die cut your pieces, but then you would have die cut pieces going across the lines, so I didn't want to do that. And then I'm also going to be using the Happy Birthday and the Hooray from this Turnabout Birthday Basics stamp set, which again comes with dies, but I'm not going to be using those today. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is creating myself a template that I can use every time I put this card together, because you do have to be kind of careful of what you stamp where and what is going to be showing when you are folding the card. So I am just simply die cutting 4 pieces and folding them along the score lines, and then I'm going to take a bone folder and press those seams really nicely. A word about that is that if you are going to be stamping across those fold lines, you don't want to do this step right now. I'm just making a template, so I'm scoring everything now, but if you're going to be stamping across, you don't want to do this step now. Now that my 4 pieces are ready, I'm going to take the template that you can print from the Concord and Ninth website. I will have a link to it, at least to the product page, which has this template on it. And I'm going to put some repositionable adhesive onto the circle. And then just so that you can see what I'm doing here is I am going to mark the fold lines with a Sharpie so that it will be really clear where you need to put adhesive. This is one of those situations where a picture is worth 1,000 words. The basic idea is that you are going to line up 2 of the circles with each other, with their centers together and lined up against the outside of the circle and one of the lines intersecting the circle. And then you are going to place the other 2 pieces on top, but turned 90 degrees. Definitely take your time lining these up because this is really important for the card to fold properly. Once I have my first 2 pieces lined up, I like to go ahead and use a small piece of washi tape or repositionable tape to put the other 2 pieces together first, and then line them up with the other 2 circles. This way I'm not trying to manage 2 separate pieces plus line them up. It's just one large piece, and I can still see where the middle section is so that I can line it up with the line that's going up and down. Once you have everything lined up, you fold back one of the flaps, and there is the little triangular area where you need to put adhesive. And this is really obvious when you're doing it because you can see the score line on the other piece and of course the folded edge of the circle that's on top. So this is the way that Concord and Ninth does theirs on their video, and they use tape like this, double-sided adhesive that is about 1/4 inch thin. I later on in the video ended up doing it a little bit differently, and I think it's a much easier way to do it. You can also use liquid adhesive here. You just have to be really careful that your adhesive does not go beyond the score line on the bottom circle, because then you will be able to see the line, the adhesive when you open up the card, and also it could make it so that your card doesn't fold properly. Once you have glued down all 4 areas, you can remove your washi tape and peel the card from the template, and the basic card is made. So now is the time when you can remove any extra adhesive that might have gone beyond the edges of the card and just work it, because the more you work the card, the easier it will fold. One more thing that I like to do with my template is to number each section. So basically there are 4 different sort of views that you have of the card. So I just start at the front and mark every section with number 1, then open it to the first step, let's say, and mark all of those sections with number 2, then go to number 3, and so on. And that way I can see when I'm stamping what areas are going to show on more than one section of the card and how it's going to affect what you're going to see. There is one section that I marked a little bit differently because part of that panel shows when you're on the second iteration of the card and part of it shows when you're on the third one. So I did mark that one section of that panel with the number 3, and I also drew a line to indicate what section of that panel shows on 3 and which section of that panel shows on 2 and 3. Now some of you might be thinking, like I did, that you want the card to open like a traditional card would, which is to have the split vertical and open the panels to the side. But what ends up happening is that everything looks great other than if you flip the card over from front to back, the back will be upside down. So depending on what you're putting on the back, that might be a consideration or it may not. I like to write my message on the back, so I'm sticking with the original setup. Okay, so now we get to the fun part of stamping. I have selected 3 dye-based inks. These are from Stampin' Up, and I have the coordinating markers. So I'm using Dapper Denim, Pool Party, and Pear Pizzazz, and I'm also going to use one of my Misties. I'm going to use the Classic Misty for all my stamping. And a note about the inks is that I would highly recommend that you use dye-based inks for this because you're going to be stamping sometimes on the front and the back of these panels, and the dye-based inks will dry quickly. So I've got my Misty and I have it set up with one of those plastic coated inserts instead of paper, so it makes it nice and easy for me to tape my panels down. I first put a piece of tape to join my 2 panels together, and then I lined it up with, in this case, the 3-inch line so that it would help me get my stamping nice and straight. And then since I'm not stamping anything on the sides of these panels, I placed my tape on the sides, overlapping the 2 panels so it would keep them in place. I removed the piece of tape from the center of my circle and then arrange the banner and presents stamps in my Misty. I'm going to be stamping them with the same ink, so I figured I could stamp them at the same time. And then I was about to ink them with that Memento Tuxedo Block ink that I have there, but I realized that that is water-based and my markers are water-based, so I switched over to VersaFine ink. As soon as I stamped these images down, I should have taken a cloth and wiped the ink off of my Misty mat, but I didn't, and then I had a little bit of trouble cleaning it off. So if you're using a pigment ink especially, or an ink that's just really saturated in color, you might want to wipe your Misty pad right away. Next, I set up my Hooray stamp in my Misty and inked it up with Dapper Denim ink, and then I set up the It's Your Day stamp. After I had cleaned and removed the Hooray stamp, I set up the It's Your Day and inked that up with Pear Pizzazz and stamped it. And for both of these sentiments I had to use my mini ink cubes because my large pads were actually pretty dry. And I'm not sure why, but I like to turn my Misty on its side and open the door to the left and ink it up and stamp. I don't know, it's just easier for me to do it than with the Misty position the way it is right now. I set my stamp pieces aside and I'm going to work on the back. So I've already taped the 2 semicircles together, and I'm just using this confetti stamp from the Turnabout stamp set with Dapper Denim and Pear Pizzazz, and I'm just going to randomly stamp all around the back, and I'm leaving the middle open so that I can write my sentiment there. And I'm putting a piece of just printer paper behind my circle because I don't want to get any ink on the glass mat and have it transferred to the other side of my panels because those are actually going to show on the card. Next, I'm going to flip the panel that I just stamped, which is side 4, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to work on the side on the panels that have the candles stamped on them. So I made sure that I consulted my my sample and checked the numbers, so I make sure that I'm stamping in the right place. And then I'm just going to put the two circles together like before and stamp them onto my MISTI, making sure that I've got the center line perfectly straight up and down. I'm going to grab my stamp and I want to place it in such a way that none of the stamped image overlaps the fold lines, because then again you'll be able to see it when I'm folding the card, and I don't want just little bits of bottoms of candles showing up. So I can pretty clearly see my score lines, but just to make sure that I don't go over them, I am going to take a piece of tape and put it along the score lines. Once again, I'm using the VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp the candles. And I made sure that these were nicely centered, but with the happy birthday sentiment that I'm going to place onto the card and then pick up with the MISTI door, what I'm trying to do is put the gap between happy and birthday right along the little gap in between the two semicircles, so that the cut isn't in the middle of the word birthday. I once again use the Dapper Denim ink to stamp the sentiment so that it's nice and crisp and dark, and then I have just a little bit more stamping before I assemble the card. Once again, I am consulting my template to figure out exactly where I need to stamp what, and I want to stamp what is showing up with the birthday candles, and so I need to take the two semicircles that I stamped for the front of the card and flip them over. And again, the template helps me make sure that I've got them in the right direction, and then I'm going to take the little confetti stamp again and use the same Dapper Denim and Pear Pizzazz inks to randomly stamp around the tops of both of those. At this point, I'm almost ready to assemble the card, so I decided to do all my coloring, and again I'm using the 3 coordinating markers. These are water-based markers, very similar to Tombow, so you could use Tombow markers. I originally wanted to use Copic markers, but the Copic markers kind of soak into the paper and then they show on the other side of the cardstock. So I had to do something different, and for the original card I made, I used coloring pencils, but I think the markers give a little bit of a different, kind of more vibrant look, so I decided to use markers for this card. But you could use any kind of coloring medium that you like that won't bleed through to the other side. I'm not going to show you all the coloring because there is absolutely no shading, just basic coloring, and I basically just colored one candle at a time, kind of trying to vary the colors and spread them out, just very simple coloring. For the assembly of the card, I'm going to do exactly what I did earlier for the template. So I'm going to take each one of the panels, I'm going to fold along the score lines and burnish it well with my bone folder. Then I'm going to take the 2 semicircles that are at the back of the card, so essentially where the number 4 panels are, those are going to be facing my circle template, and I'm attaching those with some repositionable adhesive again. And then I'm going to pull out some double-sided adhesive sheets, and I'm going to cut 2 squares that are about 3/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to cut those squares on the diagonal. So I will have 4 triangular pieces that I can use to glue all these panels together. And I hope that this makes sense. And this adhesive sheet, for some reason, when you peel away the backer, sometimes the adhesive sticks to the brown paper, and sometimes it sticks to the white paper that says scrapbook.com on it, but of course it works the same way and doesn't cause any problems at all. With everything glued down, I can now pick up my card and remove any repositionable adhesive that might be on the back of the card and test it out and see what other finishing touches I need to add to the card. 3 of my, let's say, steps of the card are fully done. So 1, 2, and the back look all really good. And 3 looks a little bit plain. So I'm now going to take that confetti stamp again and stamp a little bit more of that confetti pattern in the Dapper Denim and Pear Pizzazz. And then I'm going to use a couple of the dies in the die set to decorate this area a little bit more. The two dies I'm going to be using are the one that says Make a Wish, and also the one that cuts a panel that can cover up the large panels in the card. So because I only want half the sentiment on each one of my panels, actually I want Make A on one and then Wish on the other, I'm going to show you two ways that you can do this. One way, which I think is a little bit easier, is to die cut the sentiment first and then place the panel die over the sentiment. So I would have the rounded part just below the A, tape that into place, and run that through my die cut machine. The other way to do it, if you, for example, decided late that you wanted to cut the words out of the panel, if you had already cut your panel, you could still line up the die right where you would want the word Wish to go. And of course you can't see it, but you know that you want to be as close to the A as possible, but without the A cutting into it. So you would just carefully line it up and tape it so that it doesn't move when it goes through your die cutting machine, and then just run it through. On the original card I made, I left the panels whole, but for this card I decided that I wanted to cut them shorter so that they wouldn't show on the second iteration of the card. So I just taped them together so that I could keep them perfectly lined up. I figured out how tall I wanted them to be, and then I just put them in my small trimmer and trimmed them down to size. To glue these pieces down, I use some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, which is my favorite glue, I think, of all time. I have had no problems with clogging at all, though it may be because I've been making more cards lately, but I absolutely love this glue. So at this point my card should have been finished, but when I did my flip through, I noticed that I had some smudging around the happy birthday word, and I could not take it off with a sand eraser. So plan B was to take my Gold Wink of Stella, which, by the way, I use the Gold Wink of Stella to color in the flames on the candles, and I took the smallest star dies that I could find in my collection, and I die cut them all, and then used 3 of them to cover up a couple of smudges on my card. At this point, you could just keep adding more embellishments to the card. You could add some more die cuts to some of the panels. You could add more stamping, but it's all about personal preference. But these cards are so fun, so impactful. I posted it on Instagram a couple of days ago, and I got an incredible response. So far beyond what I have received before on the rest of my cards, so I highly recommend these dies and that you give it a try. I hope the video was helpful, and I hope you got inspired to do a little crafting today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you at the next video. For links to the products I used and still shots, please visit my blog at mariascardsandmore.com. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.